We're looking into improving public acceptance of nuclear power in Korea. I'm Leo, and we also have Ksenia and Sangbin here also presenting. So basically, our problem is that South Korea relies on nuclear for energy security and low carbon energy. But due to the Fukushima disaster, as well as supplier scandals over the past decade, public trust has been ruined. So our goal is to create an actionable strategy to improve public acceptance. So here you can see a quick graph showing public acceptance over time in relation to some of these events. So the main methods we used were first looking at public opinion surveys that were Korea specific to see the current situation, and also taking a look at actions taken in other countries to improve public opinion to see if we could draw inspiration.
Yeah, this part shows Korean public opinion to the nuclear power. Figure 1 indicates that Korean public take climate change as a serious problem more than European culture does. We found that there is a misconception about the nuclear power plant. 43% of Korean public think nuclear power generation contributes to the climate change. Even though this negative perception, public considers nuclear power is one of the most used energy source in 30 years, as figure 3 shows. We noticed that Korean public are not confident that government adequately regulates nuclear power. Just 22% of public agreed. Also, Fukushima accident affects the public opinion significantly. As figure 5 and 6 show, before the accident, there were positive words on the SNS, but after the accident, it totally changed.
Speaking of current policy of KEPCO, we analyzed several reports for several years, and as we may see in 2016, there were a lot of mentioning building trust in communities around power plants. However, in 2018, there was not paid too much attention towards it. Also, after major events of corruption, they achieved a certain standard for anti-corruption management in 2017, and in 2018, they were awarded the highest ranking for anti-corruption policy. As for the public communication, they plan to earn public trust by safely operating nuclear power plants and also do as much social activities as they could.
So now we can take a look at some parallels in other countries, such as the US and Russia. So in the US, after 3 Mile Island, the nuclear industry had to figure out how to rebuild public trust, which they had completely lost. And they found that communication was difficult due to the technicalities of radiation. So instead, they shifted their focus to energy security. However, recently, the shift has been more towards looking to nuclear as a low carbon energy source, to the point that some environmentalists are even considering nuclear now as a positive option.
Speaking of Soviet Union and Chernobyl, after Chernobyl, the trust towards nuclear power was also damaged, and Soviet Union tried to increase level of transparency in different PR activities via special governmental industrial councils. And if we speak of more modern reality, after Fukushima, the far east of Russia also lost their trust towards nuclear power, and Rosatom made some initiatives regarding the non-energy uses of nuclear power and tried to promote the nuclear medicine center in Vladivostok, which made public to trust the industry much more. And also, we're going to base our policy on a strategy based on 5 pillars: transparency, accessibility, rapid response, direct contact, and creativity.
So we conclude that there are 3 problems to deal with for improving public acceptance. First is a lack of transparency. There was an issue related to the supply of unqualified items. This caused public anxiety and led to loss of trust. Second problem is a negative perception of nuclear power due to a lack of knowledge. Public cannot understand professional resources and this makes them to have wrong thoughts that nuclear power plant accelerates climate change. Lastly, there are no communication channels between industry, government, and public. This makes public isolated from the nuclear power.
So our policy recommendations, our first one is that KEPCO should be considering communities around nuclear power plants as key stakeholders. Their current reports kind of show that they don't right now, but this is essential to building public trust, since safety of the public should be their top priority. Second, plant visits by locals and students should be encouraged and expanded. They already have a program for low-income families in the region, so they should expand this to all local community members. Third, they should be emphasizing nuclear as a low-carbon energy source alongside wind and solar. Currently, they set up nuclear in opposition to wind and solar as traditional versus new renewable energies, but instead they should be setting up the dichotomy with fossil fuels versus low-carbon sources, as they do in the US. And then finally, they should be emphasizing nuclear technology in non-energy sectors, such as medicine, agriculture, and manufacturing, so that the public sees radiation as less of an unknown, which contributes to fear. So that concludes our presentation. Thanks for your attention.